20 chief executives, they went to Washington, D.C. today. They sat down with President Barack Obama. The president said they made progress in efforts to speed up the economic recovery. My next guest also thinks that today's meeting is a positive development. Sandy Cockrell has plenty of experience with high-level executives. He runs the CFO advisory program at Deloitte. Sandy, good to have you with us on Bloomberg.
Thank you.
So your experience in dealing with CFOs
good to see you.
Would lead you to believe that this kind of meeting is good because what? It gets the dialogue going between the president and members of the corporate community?
Yes, exactly, Pimm. It starts the conversation, which is very important, I think, to get to something that we've seen in our surveys recently and talking to our clients. It's one of the fundamental things that's, I think, stalled corporate development and that type of thing is really ambiguity. And these kind of conversations between the administration and corporate executives begin to provide some clarity, which is really, really important when it comes to strategic planning.
Now, is it ambiguity, or is it they just don't like some of the things that the president has been pushing, such as healthcare regulatory overhaul, as well as financial, the Dodd-Frank bill? I mean, you can not like it, but to say that they haven't had any input seems, well, they've been lobbying in Washington all year.
Sure. No, that's exactly right. And it goes both ways. But I think in terms of as we begin the rule writing processes around these major landmark pieces of legislation, to the extent we can get clarity earlier in the process, that will go a long way to helping corporations map out their strategy over the next year or so.
All right. So this idea of getting clarity, that means what? That companies, they like to plan maybe for allocations of capital 5 or 10 years down the road for big projects.
Yes.
And they know that no one knows what's going to happen in 5 or 10 years, but they want to know what's going to happen, what, over the next 24 months, like what the legislative agenda is going to be?
Yes, correct. And I think that kind of ability to see what is going to happen, what kind of tax rates they're going to deal with, the regimes, that kind of stuff, regulatory reforms that actually add cost to business, and knowing what those are pretty important. We've seen a fundamental shift over the last 6 months compared to the last couple of years, and it's companies really beginning to focus on the top line, revenue growth, margin improvement, that type of thing, and getting away from the last couple of years of really cost containment, cost cutting, and that type of thing. So we view that as a bellwether, but that additional clarity will just help them accelerate that type of strategy development.
Does it also mean that companies have really wrung out all the savings that they can from current operations, and now to grow the top line, they got to start hiring people to actually do more work?
Interesting point. There are a lot of the CFOs that we talk to feel like they have a bit of the growth curve that they can achieve before they really have to go back and start hiring again. They're forecasting about a 3% domestic hiring increase over the next 12 months, which does not bode well for our unemployment picture. But at the same time, they're forecasting fairly robust top-line growth and earnings growth.
And is that because where most of that's going to be coming from overseas?
Some from overseas, but it's really corporate efficiencies that they've figured out how to be more efficient with a smaller, more nimble workforce, that type of thing. And they're very conscious about not adding costs back too quickly. Margin protection is very important right now in the corporate sector.
Sandy, have you seen any dichotomy between the way CFOs from, let's say, technology companies view the future and those that are purely in the manufacturing sector?
Well, technology and manufacturing in some ways are similar. When you get into other industries, when you get into financial services, for instance, and you get into healthcare, that's where regulatory reform actually has potentially huge effects, and they're the ones that are really watching what comes out of Washington.
What do we miss when we describe how much cash is on corporate balance sheets? Is it that most companies looked at a liquidity crisis that took place 2 years ago, and they don't want to be caught short ever again, so they're going to keep cash, not necessarily because they want to, but because they're worried that they won't be able to access the short-term borrowing markets?
Interesting points about that. Number one, as you well know, there's a significant amount of cash that sits on corporate balance sheets. For U.S. multinationals, it's at least $1 trillion. Now, an interesting question about that is, where's that cash sit? A lot of it sits offshore. And as we hit this refinancing bubble in the next few years, many companies will have to bring that back. So companies are quite concerned about when that bubble starts, is that they have resources on hand to make that as easy as possible.
All right, we're going to leave it there, but I want to thank you very much. Sandy Cockrell joining us from Deloitte, shedding some light on that meeting between chief executives and President Obama today in Washington.
Thank you very much.